When World War II ended, the world celebrated. The camps were opened. The fighting stopped. The Nazis had lost. But deep in the smoke and rubble, something slipped away. Not everyone was caught. Some of the worst simply vanished. SS officers who guarded death camps, led mass killings, and followed orders to the bitter end, gone without a trace. How did they escape? Who helped them vanish, and what became of them after the war? May 1945. The guns had gone quiet, but the silence didn't mean peace. Nazi Germany had fallen. Cities like Berlin were in ruins. Hitler was dead by suicide in a bunker. Himmler swallowed poison before he could be questioned. Goebbels poisoned his own children. The regime collapsed almost overnight. But the SS, those loyal soldiers of Hitler's inner circle, did not vanish. They scattered, and many were already thinking about how to disappear. The SS was not just one thing. It had thousands of members, from high-ranking generals to low-level guards. Some had led entire extermination operations. Others had stood at camp gates or kept the trains moving. By the end of the war, all of them knew what they were part of, and many knew they had to run. Allied forces were closing in from all sides. The Soviets took Berlin. The Americans pushed through the west. The British rolled in from the north. Every day brought new arrests, but also confusion. The SS had prepared for this moment. Orders were sent to destroy evidence. Concentration camps were emptied through brutal death marches. Prisoners were forced to walk for miles with no food or shelter, just to die on the road, or be shot if they collapsed. These weren't just evacuations. They were cover-ups. The goal was to kill witnesses, burn files, erase names. For the SS, the first step to escape was erasing identity. The most damning mark was the SS blood type tattoo, usually inked under the left arm. It was small, but deadly. Allied troops were trained to look for it. So many SS members tried to destroy theirs. Some burned it with cigarettes, others sliced it out with knives, or tried to tattoo over it with random designs. It didn't always work, but for many, it was the only shot at avoiding capture. Uniforms were buried or burned. Forged papers were passed hand to hand. Old friends became relatives. Real names were replaced with fake ones. Camps filled with prisoners, but also with guards pretending to be regular soldiers. The Americans and British weren't always prepared to tell them apart. In some places, entire SS groups surrendered together and were treated as regular POWs. Higher-ranking SS officers had fewer chances. Some, like Reinhard Heydrich, were already dead. Others, like Ernst Kaltenbrunner, tried to run but were caught. Many chose suicide. By gun, by poison, or by grenade, they ended their lives before anyone else could ask them questions. But not everyone gave up. Hundreds, maybe thousands, made it out of Germany completely. The roads were flooded with refugees. Railways barely worked. Identification was loose. And the confusion gave the SS something they needed: time. Some fled alone. Others formed small units. They moved through forests, rode on top of trains, or walked for days through bombed-out towns. Many aimed for Austria or Italy, anywhere farther from the Soviet line. Their goal wasn't just to vanish. It was to find the next door out of Europe. But escaping across Germany was only part of the story. The real getaway would need something more. Someone to help. Somewhere to go. And something to hide behind. The Ratlines, Vatican passports, and South American shores. After the war, Europe was filled with ruins, refugees, and questions. Allied soldiers searched for Nazi leaders, war criminals, and especially members of the SS. But while some were arrested quickly, many slipped away. They didn't disappear by accident. They used something called the Ratlines. underground escape routes that helped former SS officers avoid justice. These paths were carefully built, often by people who sympathized with them or feared the rise of communism more than they feared Nazis. The Ratlines weren't tunnels or secret trails through the forest. They were networks of people, places, and documents. One of the biggest hubs was in northern Italy. Cities like Bolzano, South Tyrol, and Genoa became stopping points for men hiding from war crimes trials. In these cities, fugitives met priests, diplomats, or Red Cross workers who were willing to help. Sometimes it was because they believed these men had changed. Other times, it was pure politics. Rome was especially important. In the heart of the city, Bishop Alois Bruner, an Austrian Catholic with strong Nazi sympathies, opened church doors to former SS officers. He ran a home for German-speaking refugees. But it became more than that. It became a shelter for men like Franz Stangle, the commandant of Treblinka, and possibly even Josef Mengele. Bruner used his position in the Vatican's Refugee Commission to issue false identity papers. He said it was an act of mercy. Others saw it as betrayal. The International Red Cross also played a part, knowingly or not. Its offices in Italy issued thousands of travel documents to displaced persons, but many were based on fake names and lies. The paperwork wasn't always checked, and once someone had a Red Cross ID and a Catholic baptismal certificate, they could apply for visas to faraway countries. Places like Argentina, Syria, or Egypt welcomed these men, sometimes in secret, sometimes in the open. Argentina under President Juan Perón became one of the most active safe havens. Perón believed former Nazis could help build his country's military and industry. In return for silence and loyalty, fugitives were given homes, jobs, and new names. Klaus Barbie went to Bolivia. Walter Ruff escaped to Chile. Alois Bruner ended up in Syria. None of them made it alone. They were carried by the Ratlines. The Ratlines didn't just offer escape. They gave these men a second chance, a new identity, a new country, and a clean slate. These networks sent killers into new lives across oceans. They just changed names and kept on living. The new lives of the SS. Joseph Mengele, the angel of death in the tropics. Joseph Mengele escaped capture and lived out the rest of his life surrounded by palm trees and silence, not prison bars. After hiding in Bavaria for 3 years, he slipped through the cracks of post-war Europe using the same tools many fugitives used: forged papers, church protection, and sympathy from those who still clung to Nazi ideology. In 1949, he sailed from Genoa to Argentina with a Red Cross passport under the name Helmut Gregor. It was clean, convincing, and backed by false baptism papers. His boat docked in Buenos Aires, a city already brimming with other escaped Nazis. Mengele had once been a promising scholar. Born in 1911 in Günzburg, he was the son of a wealthy manufacturer and studied medicine and anthropology in Munich, Vienna, and Frankfurt. He joined the SS in 1938 and was a firm believer in racial theory and eugenics. At Auschwitz, his name became infamous. Prisoners called him the Angel of Death. He selected who would die and who would be experimented on. He focused on twins, children, and people with physical deformities. Survivors recalled him smiling during selections, showing no emotion as he pointed left or right, life or death. In Argentina, Mengele started over. He lived in Buenos Aires under the alias Helmut Gregor. He had support. Argentina under Juan Perón had opened its doors to Nazis and collaborators, and Mengele found protection in expat circles. He even applied for citizenship in 1956. But things changed after 1960. Israeli agents captured Adolf Eichmann, Mengele's fellow architect of death, in Buenos Aires. That sent panic through Nazi networks. Mengele went into hiding again, this time to Paraguay, where he obtained citizenship with the help of sympathetic officials. He then moved to Brazil in 1961. In Brazil, Mengele was taken in by the Stammer family, German immigrants who sheltered him. They kept his location secret. He worked on farms, avoided doctors, and refused to appear in public. He sometimes posed as a veterinarian. He used several fake names: Dr. Jose Mengele, Peter Hochbichler, S.J. Fischer, and moved from house to house. He lived in fear, but he was free. His son, Rolf Mengele, visited him in 1977 and later said that his father showed no guilt. He still believed his work at Auschwitz was justified. In 1979, Mengele had a stroke while swimming off the coast of Bertioga, Brazil. He drowned. His body was buried under a fake name. He died as he lived after the war, hidden, protected, and untouched by justice. His remains weren't identified until 1985, when DNA tests confirmed the truth. But by then, the Angel of Death had been gone for 6 years. Franz Stangle, the commandant, who lived in the open. Franz Stangle didn't hide in jungles or use a dozen fake names. He lived out in the open, under his own name, working a steady job, surrounded by neighbors who either didn't care or didn't ask. His life after the Holocaust wasn't lived in fear, it was lived in routine. But before he reached Brazil, before the long years of quiet comfort, he was one of the highest-ranking SS men to escape justice. Born in 1908 in Altmünster, Austria, Stangle grew up in a modest Catholic household. He became a police officer in the Austrian Gendarmerie, and after the Anschluss in 1938, he was absorbed into the Nazi-controlled police force. His rise was quick. He was recruited into the T4 euthanasia program, where he helped organize the killing of people with disabilities in places like Hartheim and Bernburg. From there, he was transferred to Operation Reinhardt, the Nazi plan to murder Jews in occupied Poland. Stangle became the commandant of Sobibor, and later of Treblinka. Between 1942 and 1943, nearly 900,000 people were killed at Treblinka. Survivors described him walking the camp in his white riding boots, inspecting operations. He later claimed he was just maintaining order and efficiency, that he never touched a prisoner himself. But his job was extermination, and he did it well. By late 1943, with Treblinka shut down and the war turning, he faded into the collapsing Reich. He was arrested by US forces in 1945 and held in an Austrian prison. But in 1948, he escaped. With help from Nazi escape networks and Catholic contacts, he made his way to Rome. There, Bishop Alois Hudal, well known for helping SS fugitives, provided Stangle with false documents. He traveled to Syria first, and by 1951, he arrived in Brazil with a visa supported by Catholic relief organizations. In São Paulo, he settled quietly. He worked as a technical inspector at Volkswagen do Brasil. He used his real name, even listed it on employment records. He joined local German clubs and social groups. His past was known among some circles, but nobody turned him in. For over a decade, he lived undisturbed. That changed in 1967. Nazi hunter Simon Wiesenthal tracked him down. The West German government requested extradition. Stangle was arrested and sent back to Germany, where his trial began in 1970. The court convicted him for his role in the murder of nearly 1 million Jews. He was sentenced to life in prison. In 1971, just hours after giving a long interview to journalist Gitta Sereni, where he finally admitted moral responsibility for what he had done, he died of heart failure. His voice, long silent, was barely heard before it was gone. Walter Rauff, the technocrat of death in Pinochet's Chile. Walter Rauff was a quiet man in public, but behind that face was a mind that helped design one of the earliest Nazi killing machines. His name doesn't appear as often as Mengele or Eichmann, but his invention, The mobile gas van murdered thousands before the death camps even started. He wasn't a loud ideologue. He was a problem solver. And his problem was how to kill more people, faster and out of sight. He was born in 1906 in Saxony, Germany. He served in the Navy and later joined the SS and SD, the Nazi regime's intelligence and security branches. In the early 1940s, Ralph helped develop a system where trucks were fitted with sealed compartments and hoses from the exhaust. Jews and other prisoners were locked inside, and carbon monoxide was piped in as the trucks drove off. Death came quietly, without bullets or blood. These mobile gas vans killed more than 100,000 people in places like Poland, the Soviet Union, and Yugoslavia. He later worked in Tunisia during the German occupation of North Africa, helping round up Jews and send them to forced labor camps. After the Allies landed, he moved back into the collapsing Nazi state and eventually surrendered in Italy in 1945. He was held in an Allied internment camp, but not for long. In M46, Ralph escaped. He slipped through the confusion of post-war Europe and resurfaced in the Middle East. First Syria, then Lebanon. Like many Nazis on the run, he found sympathy in countries looking to build up their own intelligence services. Ralph had experience. He knew how to run surveillance, interrogate, break people. In the early 1950s, he quietly moved again, this time across the ocean to Chile. He arrived in Chile in 1958. He didn't hide. He lived in Santiago under his real name. He married a German-Chilean woman and integrated into the community. He ran a business and socialized with other right-wing expatriates. In the 1970s, when Augusto Pinochet came to power in a brutal military coup, Ralph became useful again. He reportedly worked with DINA, Chile's National Intelligence Service, training agents in methods of interrogation and internal security. Journalists and Nazi hunters tracked him for decades. West Germany formally requested his extradition multiple times. In 1963 and again in the 1980s, the Chilean Supreme Court rejected the requests. The argument was always the same. The crimes had happened too long ago or didn't fall under Chilean law. The US also pressured Chile, especially during the Cold War, but Ralph stayed put. He never served a day in court. He died in Santiago in 1984 from lung cancer. He was 7. At his funeral, right-wing activists and sympathizers gathered quietly to pay their respects. Some saw him as a patriot, not a war criminal. The mobile gas vans were never mentioned. There were no apologies, no interviews, no late-life reflections, just silence. The man who once engineered death by carbon monoxide left behind a life wrapped in comfort, not consequence. Klaus Barbie, the butcher who advised Bolivian dictators. Klaus Barbie was not just a Nazi officer. He was one of the most feared men in occupied France. As the Gestapo chief in Lyon, he oversaw the torture and murder of countless Jews, resistance fighters, and civilians. Survivors recalled his brutal interrogations, the screams from his prison cells, and the cold way he signed deportation orders. In 1944, he personally sent 44 Jewish children from the village of Izieu to Auschwitz. None returned. Born in 1913 in Bad Godesberg, Germany, Barbie came from a middle-class family. He joined the SS and Gestapo early, quickly rising through the ranks. By the time the Nazis took over France, he had become one of their most efficient enforcers. His nickname, the Butcher of Lyon, wasn't given lightly. After Germany's defeat, Barbie was captured by American forces. But instead of facing justice, he was quietly recruited. In 1947, the US Army's Counterintelligence Corps helped Barbie escape. They believed his knowledge of communist networks could be useful in the emerging Cold War. They gave him protection, documents, and a way out. With their help, he traveled through Austria and Italy, eventually reaching Bolivia in 1951. There, he took the name Klaus Altmann. In Bolivia, Barbie thrived. He wasn't hiding in fear. He was building power. He became a citizen, opened businesses, and formed deep ties with Bolivia's military elite. When dictators took control in the 1960s and 1970s, Barbie was there to help. He trained soldiers in counterinsurgency and interrogation. Some reports even connect him to the hunt for Che Guevara in 1967. Barbie was also involved in shady arms deals and likely drug trafficking. He ran a shipping company that operated across South America and Europe, giving him the money and reach to stay untouchable. For decades, Nazi hunters and journalists suspected his whereabouts. But it wasn't until the early 1980s that the truth came crashing down. French activist Bate Klarsfeld and others exposed his true identity. In 1983, after years of denial, Bolivia finally agreed to extradite him to France. His trial in 1987 was one of the most publicized since Nuremberg. He was charged with crimes against humanity, including the torture and murder of thousands. Survivors testified, faces aged, but memories sharp. Barbie showed no remorse. He sat cold, silent, and defiant. The court sentenced him to life in prison. He died 4 years later, in 1991, inside a prison hospital. He was 77. There were no regrets, no confessions, no signs of guilt. Klaus Barbie escaped justice for nearly 40 years, helped by the same forces that once swore to defeat the evil he served. In the end, he lived more of his life free than imprisoned. Erich Pribka, the cafe Nazi who walked free for 50 years. Erich Pribka didn't hide behind fake names. He didn't live in the shadows or bury his past in sealed archives. He lived his post-war life out in the open, under his real name, in the peaceful Argentine town of Bariloche, surrounded by lakes, mountains, and fellow fugitives. He was a war criminal who built a second life teaching German to school children and sipping coffee at cafes, as if the blood on his hands had been forgotten. Pribka was born in 1913 in Hennigsdorf, Germany. A schoolboy during the First World War and a soldier by the Second, he joined the SS and was assigned as an interpreter in Nazi-occupied Rome. But language wasn't all he was used for. In March 1944, after a partisan bombing killed 33 German soldiers in Rome, Hitler's forces retaliated. They rounded up 10 Italians for every German killed. That meant 335 civilians were sentenced to die. Pribka helped carry out what became known as the Ardeatine Massacre. He not only read aloud the list of victims, but also personally shot some of the prisoners, men pulled from jails, some not even linked to the resistance. The killings were done inside the Ardeatine caves. Victims were marched in, forced to kneel, and executed one by one with a bullet to the neck. The caves were then sealed with explosives. No survivors. After Germany fell, Pribka was captured by Allied forces, but managed to escape from a British detention camp. Like many others, he followed the Ratlines through South Tyrol and Rome, receiving help from sympathizers in the Catholic Church. In 1948, he arrived in Argentina with a Red Cross passport and settled in Bariloche, a town that soon became known as a Nazi haven. He didn't need to hide much. The local government was sympathetic, and Perón's Argentina welcomed Germans with open arms. Pribka thrived. He taught at a German school. He was active in the community. He went to dinners, joined German cultural clubs, and made friends. Everyone knew who he was, or at least suspected, but no one pressed too hard. He even traveled to Germany for visits in the 1980s, confident that his past had been left behind. That all changed in 1994, when ABC News journalist Sam Donaldson tracked him down. A camera crew knocked on his door, and Pribka answered. He didn't deny who he was. He admitted to the killings. He even tried to justify them, saying he was just following orders. The footage aired, and the world reacted. Italy demanded his extradition. Argentina complied. Pribka went on trial in Italy, where survivors of fascist violence filled the courtroom. In 1998, he was convicted of war crimes. But because of his age, he was already in his 80s, he was placed under house arrest instead of prison. He spent his final years in a quiet Roman apartment. Sometimes people shouted at his window. Sometimes they protested on the street. He rarely responded. He died in 2013 at the age of 100. The Vatican refused to allow a public funeral. His burial was kept secret to avoid vandalism or glorification by neo-Nazis. For nearly 50 years, Erich Pribka walked free, lived well, and avoided justice. And when justice finally came, it arrived too late to matter. John Demjanjuk, U.S. auto worker who was a death camp guard. John Demjanjuk lived for decades as a quiet, blue-collar American, working in a car plant, mowing his lawn, and going to church. To his neighbors in Cleveland, Ohio, he was a regular guy, a Ukrainian immigrant who came to the U.S. after World War II, made a life for himself, and never caused trouble. But beneath the suburban calm was a hidden past soaked in blood. Demjanjuk was born in 1920 in Ukraine. During the war, he served the Nazis, not as a soldier, but as a guard at several concentration camps, including Sobibor and Flossenburg. He had been captured by the Germans in 1942 and volunteered to work for the SS. Like many Eastern Europeans, he was trained at the Trauniki camp, where the Nazis recruited collaborators to guard death camps and help carry out the Holocaust. After the war, Demjanjuk didn't return to Ukraine. He claimed he was a displaced person and refugee. In 1952, he entered the United States under the Displaced Persons Act. He settled in Cleveland, became a U.S. citizen in 1958, and began working as a mechanic for Ford Motor Company. He raised 3 children. He went to church. For 2 decades, no one questioned his past. That changed in the late 1970s, when survivors and documents linked his name to the brutal Treblinka Guard known as Ivan the Terrible. Survivors remembered Ivan as a sadistic man who beat and tortured prisoners and operated the gas chamber machinery. In 1986, Demjanjuk was extradited to Israel and put on trial. The courtroom was packed. Holocaust survivors testified through tears. In 1988, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. But doubts grew. After the fall of the Soviet Union, archives revealed another man, Ivan Marchenko, as the likely Ivan the Terrible. In 1993, the Israeli Supreme Court overturned the conviction. Demjanjuk was released and returned to the U.S., where he reclaimed his citizenship. His legal troubles didn't end there. In 2009, German prosecutors charged him again, not for Treblinka, but for serving as a guard at Sobibor, another extermination camp. This time, the case didn't rely on personal identification. It relied on records proving he was present at the camp during mass killings. Survivors didn't need to remember his face. His paperwork and SS service confirmed where he had been. In 2011, Demjanjuk was convicted in Munich as an accessory to the murder of 28,060 Jews. It was a landmark case. He was the first Nazi war criminal convicted solely for being at a death camp, not for committing a specific act of murder. The court declared that being part of the system was enough. Demjanjuk died the following year, in 2012, in a German nursing home. He was 91. Because he died while appealing his sentence, his conviction was legally voided under German law. No final judgment remained. For many, it felt like another Nazi who slipped through the cracks. His past had followed him across oceans and decades, but the justice that finally arrived was too late to truly matter. Alois Bruner, Eichmann's right hand in Damascus. While many SS fugitives slipped into South America, Alois Bruner fled east, into the heat and dust of the Middle East, where he didn't just hide, he climbed into power. Born in 1912 in Austria, he was not just a cog in the machine, he helped design it. As Adolf Eichmann's most trusted aide, Bruner coordinated the deportation of over 100,000 Jews to their deaths. From Vienna to Paris to Salonika, trains left under his command. His efficiency was praised by his superiors. He believed in the mission. He called Jews human garbage. After the war, Bruner went underground. By 1954, he had made it to Egypt using a Red Cross travel document, one of many handed out without background checks. From there, he slipped into Syria and began a new life under the alias Dr. Georg Fischer. It was more than a fake name. It was a full transformation. In Syria, Bruner became a state asset. Under Hafez al-Assad's brutal regime, Bruner helped build the foundations of Syria's intelligence network. He trained agents in surveillance, interrogation, and torture, methods rooted in what he had already practiced during the war. He was rewarded with protection, housing, and secrecy. He lived in the Yarmouk district of Damascus, surrounded by guards. European journalists tried to track him. The West knew where he was, but Syria refused to hand him over. Israel's Mossad tried twice to kill him. In 1961, a letter bomb took his left eye. In 1980, another blast blew off several fingers. Bruner survived both. He told a German reporter in the 1980s that his only regret was that he didn't kill more Jews. It was one of the rare moments he acknowledged the past. For the rest of his life, he stayed silent and hidden. By the late 1990s, Bruner had become a ghost. Rumors swirled. He had died in a hospital. He was bedridden. He had fled again. Human rights investigators searched, but found nothing. He was last seen alive in the early 2000s. According to some reports, he died around 2001, possibly 2010, buried in an unmarked grave under the name Fischer. No funeral, no trial, no camera flash. Just gone. Bruner was one of the last high-ranking Nazis never to be brought to justice. While Eichmann was captured and hanged, his most loyal lieutenant faded into the background of another dictatorship. He didn't just escape punishment, he passed on his tools to a new regime. Techniques refined in the Third Reich found new homes in the cells of Damascus. Reflection. Ghosts in plain sight. The world said never again, then quietly looked away. While a few SS men faced justice, most slipped through the cracks built by apathy, politics, and power. Churches gave them shelter. Democracies gave them passports. Dictators gave them jobs. The post-war order chose Cold War allies over moral reckoning. These men weren't just forgotten, they were protected. Their crimes faded, but their afterlives infected the systems that welcomed them. The failure wasn't just legal, it was human. History didn't hide them. We did. And in doing so, we proved that some ghosts don't haunt us. We live with them, comfortably.